The storm hadn't ended. Not really. The sky was calm, yes, but inside Captain Silas Reed, thunder still cracked with every memory. Smoke from the cannon fire still stung his eyes. Salt stung the wound on his shoulder, but not as much as the silence that followed when he let him fall. His crewmate, his brother, his only family. They say the sea takes what it's owed. But what if it takes what you owe yourself? There, in the rotting pages of his journal, hidden beneath a false plank aboard the Maelstrom's End, were the last words he ever wrote before vanishing into the mists of Tortuga, and in every line was the name, Blackbeard. Not just a legend, but a shadow cast across every betrayal, every cursed coin, every broken vow in these pirate stories. And this one should have stayed buried. The gold was cursed, yes, but it was my name they screamed in the dark. Welcome to the Pirate's Diary. If tales of pirates, lost oaths, and cursed gold stir something in you, the sea keeps its stories, but only for those who dare to remember. Will you join the crew, subscribe, and step aboard? The lantern's flame flickered as the wind pushed through the cracks in the distillery walls, but it wasn't the wind that made Koa's hands tremble. He sat alone, hunched over a splintered workbench sticky with spilled rum and smoke, holding the last piece of her, a torn parchment, edges curled by salt and age, ink blurred where blood had dried. His thumb traced the letters again, her handwriting, crooked, rushed, desperate. If Blackbeard dies, the echo will not go silent, and you will hang between the ropes. She had underlined it 3 times before the sea swallowed her. Koa was never like the other boys who ran barefoot through the alleys of Port-au-Prince. They laughed, he listened, they played. He studied old knots meant to bind slaves, learned the symbols etched into coral caves by men who never returned. That's why they called him the Shadow on the docks, because he moved like a secret. But even secrets have weight, and that night, with the smell of burnt molasses in the air and the sound of a ship's bell far out in the harbor, something in his gut burned like gunpowder. In a hidden room beneath the distillery floor, Koa unrolled the parchment beneath a stolen candle. The symbols carved into its edges pulsed with meaning he didn't fully grasp, but he felt them. Ancient tides moving behind each curve. Outside, a man whispered through a rotted wooden "Duper. Tomorrow night, at Bone Cove, he won't live to see another tide." The voice was familiar. His father, the same man who once served on the Queen Anne's Revenge, now reduced to silent deals with English dogs from the company. Koa clenched his jaw. He wasn't afraid of Blackbeard's name. He was afraid of what his mother once told him in a dream, her voice brittle like dried leaves. A man who breaks his word becomes less than shadow. And you, Koa, you carry the blood of those who never kneel. He'd thought it nonsense, but now something ancient stirred. At dawn, he stood on the cliff above Bone Cove, sea spray hitting his face like spit from a god. Below, the cove yawned like a wound. Dark. Hungry. Ships moved in silence, sails down, shadows slipping like knives through the fog. Blackbeard was there, tall, monstrous, beard matted with oil and ash, eyes scanning the mist like he could smell betrayal. Maybe he could. He had a way of hearing lies before they were spoken. Koa had never met the man, but he had felt his shadow since birth. The world said Blackbeard was dead, yet here he was, flesh and storm and something more. "He's not a man," Koa whispered. "He's the oath they all broke." Then came the fire, a signal. The betrayal had begun, and Koa, just a boy, ran down the cliff with only his mother's parchment clutched in one fist and a broken dagger in the other. There's a memory he never speaks of, not even now. The way his father's eyes looked when the blade found his chest. Not rage, not pain, but relief, as if he'd been waiting for this moment since the day he whispered Blackbeard's name in fear. "I tried to save you from him," his father had whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. "But you were always hers." Koa buried him at low tide, not to honor him, but so the waves would remember. Years passed. The boy became something else. They say there's a ghost ship now that sails only under moonless skies, carved with marks no man alive can read, except one. Its helmsman never speaks. His eyes burn like coals, and on his belt hangs a parchment stained in blood. Koa became a man of many names. But in the darkest ports, drunk sailors still whisper of El Sombra, the one who walks between curses, the one whose blood carries the echo of a woman who vanished, and the shadow of the man who never truly died. Blackbeard. Some say Koa now serves him. Others say he is him, reborn, twisted by guilt and fate. But ask the sea, and the sea will only tell you this: when Blackbeard dies, the echo does not go silent, and there's always someone left hanging between the ropes. The air inside the one-eyed wolf was thick, not just with smoke and sweat, but with the kind of silence that hides behind laughter. Mugs slammed onto warped wood, laughter cracked like glass about to break, and beneath every table a blade waited to speak. Koa lay flat on the beams above, hidden in the crawl space between the ceiling and the rotten tiles. Dust coated his lips. His heart beat louder than the creaking floorboards. Below, men whispered over rum that burned more lies than it did throats. His father, Marcus Dahl, drank like he was already trying to forget. The others leaned in, merchants, deserters, hired knives with empty eyes. One man, voice trembling, asked, "What if that bastard moves first? What if he knows?" Marcus didn't blink. His voice cut through the heat like iron through water. "Blackbeard doesn't suspect the ones he's already broken. I was one of his dogs, loyal, obedient, and now I'll be the one to chain him with his own fear." The boy clenched his jaw so tight it ached. That man below had taught him how to fish, how to hold a dagger, how to make fire from wet driftwood. That man had once held him on stormy nights and whispered, "You'll never go hungry again, not while I breathe." And yet now he sat among cowards, plotting chains for the only name his mother ever spoke with reverence. Koa didn't understand everything, but he knew betrayal when he heard it. His mother's voice echoed in the back of his mind, soft as sea foam. "Blackbeard gave us food when we had none, gunpowder when the world wanted us silenced. And your father, he gave away his soul just to feel in control again. A boy shouldn't have to choose between love and loyalty, but the sea doesn't wait for boys to grow. Can you hate your father and still love him?" Koa was beginning to learn the cruel answer, yes, and it burns deeper than any wound. The wind carried the scent of fish guts and salt as Koa crept through the harbor, hidden beneath a ragged fisherman's cloak. His bare feet touched cold stone, slick with seawater and old blood. Nets hung like ghosts between the posts. Torches hissed and died under the breath of the night breeze. Dogs growled low from the shadows, too weak to bark, too hungry to run. Midnight pressed down like a hand on his back. The Cove of Bones didn't exist on any map, but Koa had seen it, again and again, in dreams that left him gasping for air. And now, there it was, a forgotten mouth in the mangroves, moonlight slashing through the trees like silver knives. A ship waited there. A brigantine, half-sunken torn sails, hanging like broken wings. Only one lantern burned aboard, soft, yellow, steady, a heartbeat in the dark. Koa stepped through the tide. The water was warm as blood. From the shadows within, a voice rose, deep, slow, and rough, like the creak of a dying mast. "Come to kill me, boy." He froze. There, in the glow of the lantern, stood a man no taller than others, no more monstrous than 100 pirates before him. But something in the air around him bent. His presence weighed more than his boots. His shadow moved even when he didn't. Blackbeard, Not a ghost, not a tale. Flesh, scars, smoke. Koa couldn't speak at first. His mouth was dry. His fingers shook. He reached into his cloak and pulled free the crumpled piece of parchment, the one written by hands he hadn't held since he was 6. "She said you're not meant to die tonight," he whispered. Blackbeard's eyes narrowed, catching the faint tremor in the boy's voice. He didn't look at the parchment. He looked through it, as if he already knew whose blood had smudged the words. Silence. Then the sound of flint brushing steel. Blackbeard's hand hovered near his pistol, black powder scent drifting in the wind like a promise. "Then tell me," he said, voice low, dangerous, tired, wounded in a way no blade could. "Reach, why should I believe you before the powder speaks in my place?" The lanterns swayed, the ship creaked, and somewhere in the mangroves, something old began to stir. The waves whispered behind them, soft as knives being unsheathed. Koa stood still, the parchment in one hand, the silver whistle in the other, its surface worn smooth by years of hiding, its carvings glinting like scars under the moonlight. He told him everything. The voices from the tavern ceiling, the pact whispered over, poisoned rum. The plan to bind him, Blackbeard, in chains rusted by cowardice, and the whistle, left by his mother, carved with symbols older than truth, known only to the bloodline of Thatch. Blackbeard didn't interrupt. He didn't even look at the boy. He walked almost barefoot, in slow circles across the damp sand. Each step left no sound, but each felt like thunder inside Koa's chest. Finally, the old pirate spoke. "Your mother, she was healer of the brigantine. I still remember her hands, warm with the scent of ronquillo leaves and smoke. She laughed when I bled, laughed like death was just another storm to sail through." He stopped walking. His face turned, half lit by the lantern, half swallowed by shadow. "And your father was my shadow, my echo, until the day he fled with a chest I never chased. Because I'd rather lose gold than break a word." His voice cracked, not from fear, not from rage, but something colder. Disappointment, the kind that settles in the bones and never leaves. "So tell me, boy," he said, eyes burning now, but not with fire, with grief. "Are you here to save me or to avenge him?" Koa looked down at the sand, at the silver whistle in his hand, at the parchment still damp with his sweat. The truth pressed against his chest like an anchor. He didn't know, maybe both, maybe neither, maybe this was never about choosing sides, but carrying the weight of both. He looked up and said nothing, because in that silence, Blackbeard already knew. The trap had been set. 30 men waited beyond the tide line, crouched in silence, blades oiled, muskets loaded, breath held like it could give them away. They thought they'd catch a ghost with steel. They thought Blackbeard would come limping into their snare, old and alone. But Blackbeard changed the rules. Without raising his voice, without explaining why, he ordered the brigantine pushed back into open water, into the belly of the fog, thick as smoke from a cannon's throat. Koa followed, him to the edge of the shore, salt wind clawing at his face, the weight of the parchment and the whistle still burning against his chest. He didn't ask questions. And then, without ceremony, without a word of comfort, Blackbeard placed a pistol in the boy's hand. Not cold, warm, freshly loaded, black powder still clinging to the barrel. "You decide," he said. His voice was low, stripped of legend. Only a man speaking now, a man who had trusted too many and paid in pieces. "If you see me, fall. If they catch me, or if I lose what makes me me, you don't let them take me breathing. That's my price for trusting again." His eyes didn't beg, they dared. Koa looked at the pistol, the metal heavy with a truth he wasn't ready to hold. And he nodded. Not because he agreed, not because he understood, but because something inside him already belonged to this night. The fog wrapped around them like a burial shroud. And just like that, the ship disappeared, swallowed by the grey. Silence. The dray in the far distance, the sound of boots, heavy, careful, sharp. Enemy hooves dragged across wet sand. Their shadows moved like carrion birds. And the boy stood alone on the shore, pistol clenched in both hands, waiting to see if legends bled like men, or if some names once spoken in betrayal never died at all. The battle didn't roar, it whispered. There were no grand shots, no volleys of flame against the sky. Just the hiss of blades through flesh, the wet crunch of boots on soaked sand, and the breath of men who knew they wouldn't live to see the next tide. Blackbeard didn't wait to be hunted. He struck first, from behind the veil of fog, with knives instead of cannons, with silence instead of war cries. By the time the traitors set foot on land, they were already surrounded. The English lieutenant never saw the dagger slip beneath his jaw. His body hit the earth with the sound of wet canvas, but Marcus Dahl, the one who knew how to disappear, fled. Through the mangroves, bleeding, clutching an old wheel-lock musket and a soaked map pressed to his chest like it was worth more than blood. Koa followed without a word. He moved like shadow between the roots, memory guiding his steps, until he found him, kneeling, alone, before a grave with no name. The soil was damp, the wooden marker half rotten, but Koa knew it the way a scar remembers flame. His mother rested there. Marcus's hands trembled. Blood stained the map, dripping in slow rivulets onto the ground she'd once called sacred. "I did it all for you," the man murmured, voice cracked with salt and shame. "For both of you." Koa stepped closer. The pistol was still in his grip, heavy as silence. "No," he said, his voice the calm before a storm. "You did it for yourself, and she died knowing you'd never change." Marcus turned, eyes wide, but not with fear, with recognition, as if he finally saw in the boy the thing he'd spent years trying to outrun. Koa raised the pistol. His hands didn't shake. 1 second, 2, and then he let it fall. The metal struck the ground with a dull thud. He didn't speak again, didn't look back. He walked away, barefoot through the mangroves, the fog beginning to lift around him. Because some ghosts don't need to be buried, some just need to be left behind. And sometimes, just sometimes, living with the weight of what you've done is punishment enough. Back aboard the brigantine, the sea still groaned beneath the hull, and the fog clung to the sails like the last breath of the dead. Koa stepped onto the deck with bare feet, mud still crusted on his ankles, silence heavy on his shoulders. He expected no welcome. But Blackbeard was there, waiting, not as a captain, not as a legend, just a man, older than the sea wanted him to be, standing with the weight of memory in his hands. He held out a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. The fabric was damp, frayed at the edges. Koa unwrapped it slowly. Inside, the silver whistle. His mother's, polished by time, etched with the mark of the thatch, a symbol older than fear, older than betrayal. It gleamed like moonlight trapped in metal. "If one day," Blackbeard said, his voice low, rough as tide against reef, "you find yourself alone, cornered, no way out, blow this 3 times, and if I still draw breath, I'll come for you." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, firm and real. "I swear it, by the sea that brought me." Koa didn't cry. He didn't flinch. But something inside him broke. Or maybe something was forged. He looked out to the horizon. The fog was lifting. The world hadn't changed. But he had. That night, a truth carved itself deep into the marrow of his soul. Justice doesn't always carry a sword. Sometimes it walks barefoot, frightened, wounded, but it walks forward, and it never turns back. The years passed like waves against a nameless shore, slowly, relentlessly, wearing him down but never breaking him. Koa vanished from charts and stories, buried. Himself on an island so forgotten, even the storm seemed to pass it by. There, among black rocks and salt air, he built a forge with his own hands. Fire, iron, silence. He became the man who fixed what others broke, hinges, harpoons, old cutlasses rusted with time, but never spoke of his breaks, never spoke of the sea, never mentioned his mother, though her silver whistle still hung around his neck, untouched by ash, time, or strangers' questions. No one dared lay a hand on it, no one ever asked twice. Some whispered he'd been a pirate, others claimed he'd killed his own father, left him bleeding in a swamp full of ghosts. But whatever they believed, none of them challenged him twice, until that night. Rain hammered the roof of the forge like war drums. The coals still glowed, but the hammer was silent. Koa stood alone, sleeves rolled, black with soot, sweat mixing with ash on his skin. The door opened without a knock. 3 men stepped in, uniforms damp, boots clean, too clean. For island mud, their accents were sharp, polished like their sabers. Crown Marines. "Koa Dal," one said, "you're charged with treason, harboring fugitives, ties to piracy. By royal decree, your silence ends tonight." He didn't move, didn't blink. The forge hissed behind him, metal cooling, wind creeping through the gaps in the walls like a memory. One soldier drew steel, the blade gleamed, inches from his throat. And then, without a word, Koa raised the whistle to his lips, once, twice, 3 times. The sound was not loud, not sharp, it was old, like a call carved into time itself. A sound the sea remembered, even if the world had tried to forget. Silence followed, but far beyond the cliffs, something stirred beneath the waves. A ship burned on the horizon, slow, silent, as if the sea itself didn't want to scream. Flames crawled up its rigging like fingers reaching for the stars. Smoke curled into the sky and vanished. No name carved into the hull, no flags, no survivors, just the sound of charred wood cracking as the tide claimed what was left. And on the cliffs above, Koa watched. The whistle still hung from his neck, untouched by fire, untouched by time. The forge behind him was cold now. No coals, no sparks, just silence thick enough to drown in. His hands, once blackened by iron and work, trembled like a boy's again. But he was no boy. Not anymore. Not since the fog swallowed the brigantine. Not since the pistol fell into the dirt. Not since they came. 2 riders with no names, faces like stone, and voices that tasted of salt and gunpowder. "He still breathes," one had said, "and you still carry a debt the wind hasn't forgotten." Koa hadn't answered. There was nothing left to say. Only the whistle, only the promise. That night, he wrote just 1 page in the journal that had stayed blank for years. A man's word doesn't sail alone. The justice born from the soul always finds wind at its back, and sometimes it smells like gunpowder and salt. He stopped writing after that, because some truths don't need more ink. They live in scars, in echoes, in the weight of silence when no one else is left to speak. Years passed. The island weathered storms. Names came and went, but those who passed through, sailors, thieves, crown spies, always paused when they saw the blacksmith with the silver whistle and the eyes that never flinched. Some said he'd once been Blackbeard's blood. Others swore he carried the man's ghost. But no one ever asked him why he never took it off. No one dared, because they all knew what it meant, that if you heard that whistle cry through the fog, it wasn't just a sound. It was a memory sharpened to a blade. It was a name no longer spoken. It was a promise returning with teeth. What was lost? Not treasure, not even blood, but something quieter, crueler. The kind of trust that only breaks once and leaves you hollow. A mother's voice that still echoes in dreams. A father's hand shaking in the mangroves. A captain's eyes asking to be spared from shame. The sea never took those things. The sea remembered. And Blackbeard? Some say his bones rot beneath a reef. Others say he walks still, not for gold, but for what he failed to protect. He warned us, Koa once whispered to the waves. We didn't listen, and now he's part of every tide that crashes in silence. Tell me, did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been there, with the pistol in your hand, what would you have done? What other sea stories deserve to be told here before the tide takes them for good? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten. This was the Pirate's Diary, and some pages bleed salt.